Liberal leader Mark Carney was caught misleading Canadians about his call with US President Donald Trump.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre vowed to give police and judges the power to dismantle tent cities and charge offenders, while offering treatment and housing to those battling addiction.
A majority of Canadians oppose the Liberals' plan to ban gas and diesel cars by 2035, calling it unrealistic and costly amid backlash from taxpayers and the auto industry. Hello Canada, it's Friday, April 25th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Clayton Demain.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Liberal leader Mark Carney was called out for misrepresenting his discussion with US President Donald Trump after sources say their phone call involved further talk of Canada becoming the 51st state. Initially, Carney denied the topic was ever brought up during the call. During the now famous phone call between the two leaders last month, Trump allegedly continued pressing Carney on making Canada the 51st state, contrary to Carney repeatedly telling Canadians that he respected the country's sovereignty. Sources with knowledge of their conversation told Radio-Canada that Canada's independence was raised in the first part of the conversation, a subject which Carney allegedly concluded the two would have to, quote, agree to disagree on. Trump initiated the talks of Canada becoming the 51st state on the March 28th call and continued to make the case for its economic advantages, while Carney ultimately disagreed with, sources said. However, this remains in direct conflict with what Carney told the public in a press conference following the call that same day, where he told the media that Trump had shelved his annexation rhetoric. Both the Prime Minister's office and Carney's campaign declined True North's request for comment. News that Carney misled Canadians comes only days before Canadians will head to the polls and after millions have already cast their ballot with advanced voting. A major message of Carney's campaign has been that Canada needs a tough leader who can stand up to Trump and US influence, championing himself as the only person with the experience and credentials to do so. That message has also been echoed by Chinese state-backed social media platforms such as WeChat, something that the government's task force dedicated to securing Canada's election from foreign interference has been investigating. So, Clayton, how has Carney responded to the allegations that he hid certain details regarding his conversation with Trump?
Right. So Carney was confronted about this discrepancy between what he said was a constructive phone call in which Trump respected Canada's sovereignty and the continued comments from Trump, which show he has a different view on Canada's sovereignty. At first, during a press conference in BC on Thursday, when Carney was confronted about Trump threatening heavier tariffs and that Canada wouldn't be sovereign if it weren't for the US, despite Carney's glowing review of the phone call, Carney avoided the question, instead leaning on how Trump has been saying this and it's not really news. He flip-flopped within minutes on the issue and only folded when several journalists from multiple outlets asked him the same question. He eventually admitted that Trump had brought up Canada as the 51st state on the call and claimed that he had already mentioned this. He said Trump hadn't called him the governor like he did Trudeau, and that the meeting they arranged for after the election would be done as sovereign countries. He also said Trump's tariffs wouldn't have as big of an impact on Canada once there is free trade between the provinces, though that goal might be difficult to achieve when Quebec is so adamant on blocking cross-country pipelines and maintaining supply management. Carney tried to play two narratives at once, and it seems to have backfired. His whole campaign hinged on the fact that Trump wants to make Canada the 51st state, while simultaneously he was presenting that because he was prime minister, Trump now respects Canada's sovereignty from that phone call. And if we recall back to that phone call, Trump acted as though Carney would win the election, and he said he looked forward to working with him. And in another interview, said he would prefer that Canada have a liberal leader. So Carney also said a benefit to him being the leader is that he and Trump have met several times because they float around the same elite circles. So it's interesting to watch Carney attempt to balance the two. On one hand, saying he'd work well with Trump while also saying Trump has to be stopped. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said he would permit police and judges to have more authority to dismantle tent cities if elected. According to Poilievre, a conservative government would amend the criminal code to allow police to lay charges against people who violate the right to safety in public spaces, known as the Safe Streets and Communities Act. Poilievre said, quote, "No more excuses by politicians claiming they don't have the powers. The powers will be right there in the criminal code. No more paralysis from politically correct liberal politicians who are too afraid to take action."
Public spaces must be safe for everyone. We will take back our streets and restore order in our communities. And we will give people that are currently trapped in these awful circumstances a pathway to a better life. A life with a home, with nutritious food, physical exercise, connections to family, a new chance to start over. It's going to be a future of hope. And the people who come out of these encampments from out of the shadows, they will come into the light and enjoy the Canadian dream, the Canadian promise. And they will have a superpower when they come from these backgrounds. They will have a superpower that they have lived through the worst valleys, and now they can appreciate the summit on which they will enjoy their lives. So our plan is clear. First, we will amend the criminal code to give police legal powers so that they can remove individuals who are a danger to public safety and clear public spaces where access is currently blocked by tents and temporary shelters. No more excuses by politicians claiming they don't have the powers. The powers will be right there in the criminal code. No more paralysis from politically correct liberal politicians who are too afraid to take action.
This would allow for authorities to dismantle illegal encampments while also providing those inhabiting them with necessary housing and mental health treatment. Tent encampments have exploded across Canada in recent years, which rapidly devolved into hotbeds for drug abuse and violent crime. Poilievre said under his leadership, the federal government would adopt a housing-first approach to help people get off the streets who are often battling with opioid addiction and into housing. Poilievre had previously promised to shut down so-called safe supply sites across Canada, endorsing mandatory drug treatment for those struggling with addiction. He also vowed to sue opioid companies, which he believes bear much of the responsibility for Canada's drug crisis in the first place. Poilievre's platform would, quote, "where appropriate, allow the occupants of these encampments to face criminal charges while empowering judges to offer them simple possession charges as long as they opt to enter an addiction treatment program." So, Isaac, we hear a lot about these encampments around Canada. Where are the major tent cities in Canada at the moment, and how successful have police been in dismantling them with the current laws available?
Yeah, Clayton. So, as many of our listeners likely know, most of Canada's major cities have tent cities somewhere in them. You only need to drive through downtown and you'll likely cross paths with one. Some provinces and cities have it worse than others, though. For example, in 2023, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario reported more than 1,400 homeless encampments, with over 100 in London alone. And in 2023, the Conservatives said there were 82 encampments in Toronto, which the party has said has now grown to over 200. And of course, it's only gotten worse since then, as the cost of living in Canada has worsened, driving more Canadians towards homelessness. Over the last few years, we've also seen many stories emerge from tent cities of firearms, drugs, rape, gang violence, deaths, and the list goes on. Some cities have taken the issue more seriously than others, though. For example, the city of Ottawa looked to erect tent-like structures to house homeless migrants. We also saw the many battles between residents, universities, cities, provinces, and protesters about illegal encampments set up to protest on campuses. This law could provide authorities more power in dismantling those encampments as well. We've also seen some on the left try to advocate for safe supply, drugs that were being found and abused in these tent encampments. Poilievre's pledge also emphasizes recovery over this safe supply failure. He said the Conservatives will fund 50,000 addiction treatment spaces, which will be a better place for addicts to recover than tent cities where drugs and crime run rampant. We saw different police responses from different jurisdictions in response to encampments, both among the homeless and the protesters. For example, a court-issued injunction previously stopped the Edmonton police from clearing homeless encampments. This was despite the Edmonton police receiving over 14,000 complaints about encampments in 2023. In response to these complaints, they ended up investigating and addressing over 4,500 camps. Poilievre also pledged to crack down on crime in many other ways, such as mandatory life sentences for those convicted of 5 or more counts of human trafficking, importing or exporting 10 or more illegal firearms, or trafficking fentanyl. He will also end the Liberals' catch and release policy, along with many more changes to what he said will, quote, end the chaos and restore order and safety across Canada. A majority of Canadians are opposed to the Liberal government's plan to ban the sale of new gas and diesel passenger vehicles. A new poll from Leger, commissioned by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, found that 60% of decided Canadians are opposed to a national ban on the sale of all gas and diesel-powered vehicle sales by 2035. Opposition to the gas and diesel vehicle ban is stronger amongst Albertans, with 68% opposed to the ban, while Quebecers are more partial to the policy, only 55% disapproving. The poll also found that women are more likely to oppose the gas and diesel vehicle ban than men, with a 5-point gap between the two groups. In late 2023, the Liberal government, under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, had announced that Canada would be following in the footsteps of other jurisdictions like the European Union and the United Kingdom in banning these passenger vehicles in an effort to achieve net zero emissions. The poll parallels a previous finding that 66% of Canadians believe that the Liberal government's timeline in phasing out the sale of gas and diesel passenger vehicles is, quote, unrealistic. BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Carson Binda, said that the poll clearly indicates that taxpayers do not want to foot the bill for an expensive nationwide transition to electric vehicles. Binda is calling on all parties running in the federal election to make their stance on a conventional vehicle ban clear for taxpayers. At the time the Trudeau government announced the policy on gas and diesel vehicles, leaders of the auto industry came together to slam the policy as a reckless move. Tim Roos of the Canadian Automotive Dealers Association wrote, quote, instead of attempting to dictate what individuals have to purchase, we suggest government focus on creating the right set of circumstances to stimulate demand. So, Clayton, how has Poilievre responded to the Liberal government's EV sales target, and what are some of the main criticisms?
So Poilievre announced on Thursday that he would cut the Liberal government's planned tax hike, which would impose a $20,000 tax on each vehicle sold that exceeds the government-allowed limit for gas-powered vehicles. Poilievre's criticisms echoed some of those industry leaders, saying that Carney's Liberals just want to control the market and tell Canadians what vehicles they are allowed to drive, and blasted the practicality of Canada switching to EVs by 2035. Canada, as our listeners know, gets very cold in the wintertime. In that press conference, Poilievre noted a recent Canadian Automobile Association test, which found that in just -7 to -15 degrees Celsius temperatures, EVs can lose up to 39% of its battery life in the cold. And obviously, Canadian winters often see temperatures well below that. He also cited an independent economist who said Carney's plan to phase out gas-powered vehicles by 2035, as evidenced in Liberal policies and his own book, Values, would cost Canadians $138 billion and kill 38,000 jobs. But Poilievre made it clear he wasn't against Canadians who wanted to buy EVs. He would still honor every government contract to build EVs in Canada, protecting those jobs, but that he was against the government trying to control what vehicles Canadians can drive. He said his GST break on Canadian-made vehicles would still apply to Canadians looking to purchase a made-in-Canada EV. And he noted that the Liberals' tax hike on gas vehicles next year will only drive business outside of Canada and would drive consumers right into the pockets of foreign EV manufacturers such as Tesla.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating.